to the days of the week by their English name, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. In Yiddish, it's also Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. The only day of the week in Yiddish was Wednesday, that in Yiddish became mitzvah. Wednesday is the day of the week that was named after Jupiter, which was probably at that time, the most celebrated of the Avodah Zarah. So for some reason in Yiddish, they didn't want to call it Wednesday, so they called it mitzvah. But the other days, Donnerstag, Freitag. Freitag is after Venus. Venus is the Frey, is the female star. So it's Freitag, you never knew. So it's really named after Goyish names. So how is it if it's a mitzvah say? So there are a number of difficulties here. One problem is that the Ramban himself, in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, does not count this as a mitzvah say. Here we have the Sefer in the Mitzvah Chinuch, in the Sefer HaIkrim, and in the Binyan Shloimeh, in the Beis Shloimeh, they all write the mitzvah say to call the month by its number. If you look in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, not the Rambam and not the Ramban count such a mitzvah. So where did the mitzvah go? One problem. Another problem is if it's taka mitzvah say, and we're not supposed to call it January, February, March, etc. So how is it in the Bayis Sheni? They took up the name Nisan here, Sivan. So good, the Ramban says they called it Nisan because they wanted to remember Golus of Parat. But what about the mitzvah say in the Torah? In the Sefer HaIkrim, Maimer Gimel, Perek Tezayin, he writes that Matzinu mitzvah shenishtana. The Rambam says that there's no mitzvah that could change. He says Matzinu mitzvah shenishtana. We have a mitzvah that say that changed. There was a mitzvah to call it Rishon Sheni, the month by the number, and now we have to go to Parash. They called it Nisan Year 7. Why? Of course, the Sefer HaIkrim, everyone says it's wrong. A mitzvah can't change, but what's the answer? So this would appear to be a tremendous difficulty. Comes, the Satmar Rebbe has a very nice tshuva. In the Shilas, the tshuva is Divrei Yoel. And somebody wrote him a letter complaining that when the Satmar Rebbe writes letters, or wrote letters, he didn't put a date on the letter. So somebody, I don't know, the Satmar Rebbe, he had nothing better to do but to answer. It's amazing. You know, most of us, the people who nudge, we don't have patience. And the Gedolim, they have patience, the people who nudge them. So here, someone writes a letter to the Satmar Rebbe. Why, when you write your letters, why don't you write a date? So the Satmar Rebbe sat down and he wrote him a tshuva, which is printed in the Divrei Yoel. I don't know if the Shayel meant to nudge, maybe he just asked him as curiosity, but he sat down and he wrote a long tshuva. First of all, he wrote, why don't I write the day of the week? The Ramban says, it's a mitzvah say, to call a day Yom Rishon L'Shabbos, Yom Sheni L'Shabbos. The truth is, in a ksuba and a star and bezdin, you listen ever, when they read a ksuba under the chuppah, so sometimes you listen to the first words, so it starts for Ravi b'Shabbos, b'Sheni b'Shabbos, b'Shlishi b'Shabbos. It starts with the day of the week. That's what it's a mitzvah say. So why don't we always refer to the day as the day of the week? Zok, the Satmar Rebbe, to take a look in the Torah Tamima, in Parshas Yisroel, on the Pasuk, by the Aseret HaDibros, by Shabbos. It talks about Shabbos. So the Satmar Rebbe writes, according to Torah Tamima, that the Torah Tamima writes, it's Tzorachin on the Ramban, that we never found in all of Shas, in all of Tanakh, that the Tanakh should refer to a day of the week. It says when Shlomo HaMelech started building the Beis HaMikdash. It says which month it was, B'Chodesh Ziv. It says which year it was, B'Shana Revius. And we find in other psukim it says which day of the month. Can you think of one place in Tanakh where it says which day of the week? Not only that, But the Gemara Rosh Hashanah Daf Gimel writes, the Seirish that Loi Matzinu, you can't touch a pasuk to refer to the day of the week, because we don't find that in Tanakh the Nevi'im ever refer to the day of the week. If it's a mitzvah say to refer to the day of the week, why didn't they do it? So the Satmar Rebbe, Al Karcha, for some reason, there's no mitzvah say to call the day by the day of the week. And the third Tanima says, Tzarech Iyun, on our custom in the Ksuba, we write the day of the week. He says, Tzarech Iyun. Others have answered that we write the day of the week to know if there's a contradiction, if the day of the month is accurate. We have the day of the week and the day of the month in the star. In case one is a mistake, we can cross-reference. But it's not there because it's a mitzvah. So Zot the Satmar Rebbe. So what am I going to do? Chazinon l'Rabbanon kashishoy da'avdi hachi. We find, he says in the Tshuvas Harash and the Tshuvas Haramah, that they never wrote the day of the week. He says, I also don't write the day of the week. And he said the Rosh and the Ramah didn't write the day of the month either. They didn't date their letters. He says, I also don't date my letter. So the Satmar Rebbe writes at the end of his letter, I'll tell you in a minute how he explains the Ramban, but interestingly he writes to the Shayol that the Shayol is in the Geder of Oyev mitzvahs lo yispa mitzvahs. Somebody wants to make new mitzvahs. So, it says, Oyev kesef lo yispa kesef. If you like money, you never have enough. So he tells the Shayol, you're an Oyev mitzvahs lo yispa mitzvahs. There aren't enough mitzvahs for you. You're making more mitzvahs. But he says that actually it's not a mitzvah every time to write. But it's interesting, he ends off the end of his letter. He says, first, Tilarayv Kedushasai Bechasidasai, Niskayim by Oyev mitzvahs, La Yispa mitzvahs. You like to have more mitzvahs. Lezeh, the Satmar Rebbe ends, Lezeh, Hineni Mekayim Achshav Divrei Chacham. So now I'm coming to be Mekayim, you, the Shayol, your words. B'michtavi zeh, in this letter, Shul Kasim, the Chasim, the Mitzvah, Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Vayechi, Shnat Hey, Tov Reis, Tzadik Dalet. That's the way he ends his letter. So I wonder, the Satmar Rebbe had a great sense of humor. But he ends it, you want me to be Mekayim what you said? And he signs it, I'm writing this, the Mitzvah, Shabbos Kodesh. He doesn't write Yerusha L'Shabbos. He writes the Mitzvah, Shabbos Kodesh. I wonder how he meant that. In Mitzvah, Shabbos Kodesh, the kiyum of the mitzvah? Or, because it's counting according to Shabbos, but he didn't write Yerusha L'Shabbos. So I don't know. But what do we do with the Ramban? What's Pshat in the Ramban? Ford says it's a mitzvah saseh. So Zot the Satmar Rebbe in this tshuva, that there's no actual mitzvah to count, to go verbally and count to the day. No such mitzvah. Is there a mitzvah to count the month to the day, the month to say, Ayoim, today is this and this day of the month, or this and this month of the year, rather? There's no such mitzvah. There's no kiyum mitzvah in writing it. The mitzvah is that when a person has to make a cheshbon, of a number of the day of the week, so then we say it's the third day, the fourth day. If you're coming to say which number day it is for some reason, so you're supposed to count by Shabbos. If you're coming to say which month it is, you're supposed to count by the month. It's not a mitzvah masi. It's not a mitzvah to do it. The mitzvah is in the attitude. It's not a key. It's not one of the Taryag mitzvahs. But that a year has to have the attitude that the week revolves around Shabbos, that the days of the week are counted around the Tachlis Abriya, around Shabbos. A person has to have the attitude that the months of the year revolve around Nisan. That's the mitzvah, not so much to actually go and count it, to write it in a letter. There's no mitzvah in the Maisa. The mitzvah is more in the attitude that a person has to have to the counting of the month. So when we talk about the time, it's not so much a Maisa mitzvah, but as we say, a mitzvah in the attitude of the counting of the month. Now, once we've reached this point, so what did we discuss tonight? First of all, the cheshbon of the years that we have, we have a clear, number of years from Avraham Avinu till today. Absolutely clear, not patched together. Straight from Chazal. We have a clear counting of all the years. The month, again, we count from Nisan. The days from Shabbos. What is the Nakuda, the point of the